Disorder syndrome, commonly known as pollution syndrome, is a difficult and incurable disease that has made all physicians, including the extraordinary, feel extremely difficult throughout the entire era. The sick will have only 1 year left in their lifespan. Under the eerie mist of the red moon, they will all transform into twisted monsters, becoming accomplices to filth, relatives of natural disasters, and the source of faith for the evil god Ren Cairen, who resides outside this world. The cause of the disease. Unknown. Time of onset. Unknown. Infectious level. Extremely high. Treatment method. None. Patient risk level. SSS. If you see patients with this syndrome group, please immediately report their whereabouts to the order department. We will rush to the scene as soon as possible to shoot them to ensure public safety. For those who successfully report, we will award hardware coins as a reward. So the next day, an additional disorderly person volunteered at the entrance of the order bureau. Riyakercha. Sir, I am reporting myself with my real name and applying for approval. How come it's you again? Do you have to come here every day to surrender and check in? Keywords of the novel. They all call me Shin Whoopop Up, they all call me Shin TXT Complete Collection Download, they all call me Shin Latest Chapter Reading. Chapter 1. Riyakercha. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Riyakercha. The color of the sky has completely changed from gray-blue to withered black. Surrounded by it, the moon emits a tinge of blood, like an eye witnessing everything on the earth in a dull way. The black forests that have risen from the ground have completely lost their lives, and several crows stop at the top of the dead branches, mocking the incompetence of all things. Ga. Several voices grew longer and longer, reaching a somewhat mournful level, and on the ground where they lingered, several people in linen cloaks were desperately digging through the damp soil with shovels. Beside them was a moldy coffin. The sound of knocking kept coming from the coffin, and occasionally a few incomprehensible shouts appeared, all of which made everyone even more fearful. They continued to dig up the soil, acting like a winded machine. The soil pit is digging deeper and deeper. The soil piles up higher and higher. And Liya is already tired of filming. He hugged his head in pain, feeling that everything was so unfair. Looking back on his life, it was like a capital word for tragedy. Not long ago, he was desperately rushing home due to heavy rain without an umbrella, but one day, he didn't pay attention and disappeared from the ground. At the last moment, there was no lantern in front of him, he was just thinking. Who is so wicked as to steal the manhole cover? However, those were not the main points. The point was that as soon as he woke up, he was stuffed into a coffin and pulled to a place for pollution-free treatment. No matter how he slapped him, those people did not react. The increasingly urgent actions declared that Liya's death was approaching. Undoubtedly, resistance will only accelerate the process of one's own death. During the crisis, Liya stopped shouting and urgently considered countermeasures, such as how long a person can live underground after being buried alive, and how to save themselves. First, observe if there are any tools on your body. He touched his entire pocket in the darkness and found that this body was not his original body. Compared to his original self, this body appeared taller and slightly thinner, suggesting that the original owner had rarely eaten enough. Besides, he also touched a soft object at the back of his neck. What is this? Liya poked curiously, only feeling a sharp pain in the area where she was poked, and the skin moved on its own. The so-called tactile sensation was no less than poking her finger directly into her eyes. Hiss, wait. Eyes. He has an eye growing behind his neck. At this moment, those people were unsure if they had already dug the cave and hastily lifted the coffin. The coffin also made a creaking sound as they moved, as the old artifacts were in disrepair. Hurry up and throw this disgusting pollutant in, if it's any slower, we'll all be infected with the bacteria. People who are contaminated by pathogens are all carriers of pathogens. I didn't expect such a person to appear here too. Fortunately, he was the first, and I hope he was also the last. May the sun protect Winston. These people kicked the iron shovel at their feet to the side and carried the wooden coffin in fear as they walked step by step to the freshly excavated pit. They glanced inside, and the damp soil emitted a peculiar smell of decay. There were even unlucky reptiles that had just been dug in the pit. Leah felt the commotion around him and was extremely anxious, but time was too tight, and he still couldn't escape the fate of being buried underground. The group of people just saw that the wooden coffin had finally stopped moving, let out a deep sigh in their hearts, and ran away. They must immediately undergo baptism to prevent themselves from becoming carriers of pollution, leaving Leah alone with a few wooden boards, soil, and crows as companions. Why are they so afraid of themselves? What is pollution? After several unsuccessful attempts to break the coffin, Leah's hand was also scratched by a wooden board, but those wounds did not bleed. Instead, they mysteriously cracked open, revealing pupils that were no different from real eyes, emitting a faint eerie fluorescence in the darkness. The golden light. This is the first bright color that Leah saw after traveling, and with the appearance of her pupils, Leah's vision improved a bit, and the scene inside the coffin gradually became clearer. He saw the dawn of hope again. Leah excitedly pushed the wooden board above, with an increase in strength, but not enough. Time was precious, so he reached out to touch his front and found a metal button there. He gritted it with his teeth and pulled it off. The wooden board is not sturdy, but with the strength of an adult man's lying flat arm, there is nothing to do with it. Leah could only tap on each wooden board, find the weakest point, and then use iron to dig through it, gradually excavating the soil outside. In order to prevent soil from entering his mouth and nose, he took off his coat and placed it over his head. As his movements accelerated, the oxygen inside the coffin became thinner and thinner. And Leah could only constantly increase the number of wounds on her body, making those eyes more numerous. His golden eyes kept blinking on him, making Leah feel like his strength was unprecedented. Bang! Finally, he chiseled a hole in the wooden board for people to pass through. Fortunately, the newly excavated and buried soil was relatively soft, and Leah quickly took this opportunity to climb out. His movements were like a wriggling worm, and his eyes unconsciously closed and opened due to the soil. Shortly after, Leah extended his hand upwards and fiercely flicked it, leaving the underground to see the sun again under the shining red moon. Ha! I'm free now. He took a few breaths, turned his head to look at the pile of soil, and was surprised to find that the person who buried him had even erected a tombstone for him. The tombstone reads, "This is a twisted pollutant, extremely dangerous. Don't approach, repeat, don't approach, otherwise you will face everyone's pursuit, and you will also contract terminal illness like him and become a monster. May the sun purify your soul, and may you be reborn in the realm of bliss, eliminating evil obstacles." The font used was a language similar to English, and Leah stood in front of the tombstone for a long time, realizing that he could read without any obstacles. Also, it can be recited without any obstacles. He could hear the conversation between those few people clearly just now, and it seemed that this should be the remaining memory of the original owner of this body. As for deeper memories, Leah closed his eyes and tried to trace back, only to receive very little information in the end. This person's name is Riyakercha, Riya. It's very similar to his name, and I don't know if it's lucky or unlucky. In the past few years, the original body was sold to a mountain mining area near the town of Wentz to mine coal. In this era, people had just discovered their miraculous use and urgently needed to mine coal and establish factories. As a result, poor Riya was forced to mine for half a year. Until one time, he took advantage of people not paying attention and escaped, circling around and hiding in Wynn's town. The so-called most dangerous place was the safest place. And the pollution disease caused by Tian Sha was probably contracted during his escape. No one knows the cause of pollution disease, but this disease does indeed cause a sharp reduction in life expectancy, and after death, it will turn into a monster. Memories have come to an end, Leah. No, Ria can't recall anything more, except for the house she rented in Wenstown and the 3 months of rent he owed. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Incurable Diseases. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Incurable Diseases. This disease is not contagious and the cause is unknown, but others don't think so. They are hostile to the sick, although I would be hostile if it were me, but now I am the one who is sick. Tisk, as soon as I traveled through time, I found out that I had a terminal illness. It's really frustrating. Let's find a way to go home and take a look first. Ria carefully patted the soil on his body, filling the grave with new soil and disguising himself as if nothing had happened. After finishing all of this, he instinctively glanced at the sky. The red moon above was full, and at some point, the withered trees near him were crowded with crows, seemingly hoping that his death could give him a feast. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, there is no buffet available today. Facing this scene, Ria felt a sense of unease in his heart. He knew nothing about this place, not to mention the world. He didn't even know how to close his own eyes now. In such sparsely populated areas, if Ria doesn't find a way to hide himself, he will undoubtedly become a living target, and there is never a shortage of hunters in the jungle. Thinking this way, he wrapped his coat tighter and even deliberately raised the collar to cover his eyes at the back of the neck. This coat looks a bit big when worn and doesn't fit well at all. I wonder if it was stolen from somewhere by the original body, or to put it nicely, it was picked up and brought back. Ria fastened 2 intact iron buttons and touched his stomach. His stomach was unusually hungry, and no one could stop him from going home to find something to eat at the moment. He walked hastily, and the crows watched him leave without following him. Instead, they roared one after another, as if celebrating after a dark ritual. 2 hours later, Ria, who had hidden his head and appeared on the path, finally found his residence. He had a memory of where it was, but even so, he was still startled when he got the key under the carpet to open the door. The room was pitch black, not much better than a haunted house, and he could only find candles and coal lamps without kerosene. After lighting all the candles, the warmth and light finally arrived. This behavior is still too extravagant, because the poor guy's home is too poor, with few candles and lights to squander. Ria temporarily ignored these discomforts and stepped on the wooden floor to find the cabinet where the food was stored. As soon as he opened it, a starving mouse fell to the ground with a click sound, squeaked twice, and slowly crawled to the side. And this also gave Ria a brand new understanding of the home. He held a candle and leaned into the cabinet, where he saw the 2 incredibly hard black bread pieces on the top layer. Of course, there were already rat tooth marks on them, and normally, they could no longer be eaten. Ria remained silent for a few seconds, engaged in sufficient mental struggle for himself, then took out the bread and used his hands to pry off the bitten area above. Our family is so poor, so we can't waste the mouse we just had. So the pitiful mouse, who had just crawled not far, was caught by Ria's tail and found a container to put it in. By the way, he fed it the crumbs he had just broken off. Eat it, don't treat yourself unfairly. Look at how thin you have become. Wait for the mouse to gain weight, then you will have meat to eat. Although it is disgusting, Ria is very considerate of the future. He knows that if he cannot make money, then waiting for him will be this kind of life. To be on the safe side, Ria also found all the knives at home and neatly arranged them together for self-defense. After being fully prepared, he began to observe his own eyes. The golden pupils didn't blink unless Ria poked them with her hand. This disease was unheard of, and Ria felt a chill in her heart as she thought about the possibility of dying from them in the future. I am so poor and suffering from a terminal illness, and only you are willing to stay with me at this house. Ria looked down at the mouse, which was about to become dry wood and was still struggling to nibble on black bread. Is it really so unpleasant to eat? Leah took a bite with disbelief, his expression twisted for a moment, almost not spitting out the overnight meal he didn't know he had. However, the mouse took the crumbs seriously and ate them one by one. When he looked at Riya again, his eyes even showed a hint of gratitude. At this moment, Riya's eyes could close in his hands. He looked at the mouse in surprise and immediately went non-stop to retrieve his original diary. He would not miss any opportunity to survive. The diary records nothing more than a bunch of trivial complaints. He seems to enjoy complaining about his misfortune, but when he flipped back to the last page, it recorded something completely different. April, if you can't find the calendar and don't know the months, just consider it April. I like the number 4, it makes me feel at ease. My illness is getting worse and harder to hide. I don't know when I will be caught or suddenly die. Fortunately, my mouse can keep me going. As long as I treat it well, I feel comfortable all over. It must be my lucky star. Perhaps being good to others is also acceptable. But I'm not likable at all. My landlord always wants me to pay rent and knocks on my door every day and night. No one will like me. The diary content came to a sudden halt. Be kind to people. Riya looked at the mouse and saw a hint of almost devout emotion in his gaze. He thought it was an illusion, so he gave the guy some bread again. His gaze became even more urgent, and he even bowed directly to Riya. I see. Riyadan realized that if a mouse is compared to a believer who is a god, then his act of giving it bread is undoubtedly a gift, and the power of the mouse's response is exchange. In a daze, someone is spreading this message to his mind. There is a power of faith in this world, and as long as I find a way to make the other person believe in me both physically and mentally, it can help me extend my life. This is the alternative way of survival discovered in the original body. Riya was a bit surprised, but even though his original body found such a way to prolong his life, he still struggled to leave this world. It's better to say that his departure is also a kind of luck. I have to go gather faith, right? Riya closed his eyes and opened them again a few seconds later. At this moment, his mood was unusually complex. He didn't care about his hunger now, but took a few steps to approach the mouse and said, "Eat slowly. Tomorrow, I'll go to work and buy you better bread and cheese." The mouse's eyes are brighter, and Riya's golden eyes are closed again. Now, as if discovering a new continent, Riya kept explaining to the mouse the bright and glorious future, but at this moment there was no more movement on his body. It seems that the faith that a single organism can provide is ultimately limited. If other pollution patients could discover this fact, then what would happen would be unimaginable. Just witnessing people's attitudes towards patients, they should not be able to endure the day when people have positive emotions towards them. Riya picked up the knife from the table and prepared to go out and search for some lonely wild animals to add some happiness to his life. However, as soon as he opened the door, before he could put the fruit knife into his pocket, he saw an old woman standing in front of his door, with a large string of keys hanging around her neck. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Pollutants. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Pollutants. If I guess correctly, this is the landlord. Room. Before Riya could speak, the old woman pursed her lips and said, "What room? Call me Mrs. Stewart. As soon as I heard any commotion upstairs, I knew you had done something else. Why, you haven't paid the rent today." "There will be soon, give me a few days." I've heard all these words with calluses in my ears. Seeing that you have healthy limbs, why are you idle all day and not going to work? Do you think our town will consume taxpayers' money to give subsidies to you who have never paid taxes? It seems that the landlord did not know that Riya was a polluter, and Riya breathed a sigh of relief. At that time, those who buried themselves were probably members of the church, and they vaguely heard them say something about the sun. Can it be that the people here believe in the sun? In short, it's better to stay away from them when you see them. Once you have accumulated enough supplies, you can escape to another place. Riya had made up her mind, but on the surface, she showed a gentle smile and said, "I'm going to look for a job, after all, I can't cause you trouble all day. It's rare for you to have this kind of enlightenment, Mrs. Stewart said with a strange tone, but she still gave Riya a paper bag of bread. I baked it myself, I can't finish it, it's a pity to throw it away. Thank you very much, Auntie. Cough. Mrs. Stewart heard so many words from her usually gloomy tenants for the first time, and they were also quite outgoing. She couldn't help but feel a bit uncomfortable. She looked away at Riya's fruit knife and secretly guarded herself. What do you want to do with the knife? I'm going to shave my head. Stewart. There's a lot of nonsense going on. Don't do anything out of line. Suicide will lead you to the 18th level of hell. Also, don't go out. You should remember that going out at night will encounter demons. After she finished speaking, she gestured a unique symbol in her heart and left directly. There are not many tenants in this house, and the old woman also has a lonely personality. When her children are not around, she sees Riya as her grandson. Although this grandson always daringly refuses to pay rent and keeps himself locked up in the house every day, if it weren't for seeing him today, Mrs. St would have thought he was dead and smelly inside. The rent was originally not expensive, and if anyone were to die, there would be no one willing to rent her house. Riya couldn't deny this, but it was impossible not to go out at night. If he didn't go out now, it would be easy for him to get into trouble during the day. So Riya hastily ate a piece of bread, hid the fruit knife, and when Mrs. St was about to return home, he quietly left the door. Night is the best hiding method. Riya arrived at the small town at night, with a bright red moon in the sky. If you pay more attention, the visibility of things in the air will also decrease. He didn't walk far, so he hid his figure in a nearby alley and conducted an experiment with a few cockroaches he found. He distributed the food among them, and this group of cockroaches ate it, but there was no response. But when these little ones faced the eyes on Riya's hands, they trembled all over, and the tentacles on their heads swung wildly, while Riya also felt an improvement in his state. Very good, effective. And indeed, the eyes on the body can play their own role. As monsters. It is impossible to go out at night and encounter danger when going out. If you insist, Riya herself is the biggest danger in this town. He silently thought to himself that these gifts and beliefs were meant to be exchanged, and the golden eyes only enforced this exchange. If this kind of enforcement is useful for everyone, then there is no need to worry about living anymore. Thinking of this, Riya's mood was very good. He was preparing to search for other creatures, but suddenly a figure appeared behind him. The figure was as black and sticky as oil, leaving sticky marks wherever it passed. Today is blood moon, and there will be an unprecedented number of heretics. It slowly approached Riya, and in the eyes of this heretic, the solitary Riya was nothing more than a feast. However, when it approached Riya and prepared to attack this unsuspecting strange human who only fed cockroaches, it froze and its current body could not move. What is that? It saw the eye on Riya's neck, which revealed a chill and stillness in the darkness, as if it had self-awareness and locked onto it tightly. At this moment, Riya was not yet aware of what had happened. When he turned around, he saw a stone sculpture suddenly appearing in place, which really scared him. But when he fed the cockroaches smoothly, his first reaction was to send food to the stone carving, which he took unnaturally. Wait, it took it. Ryadon felt an unprecedented power flooding him. He couldn't help but close his eyes, feeling the overwhelming force almost burning his blood vessels. Can stone carvings provide a lot of faith? Although I don't know why, it's still better to look for such things. After a moment of contemplation, Riya observed the stone carving without any reaction and immediately left without hesitation. Staying longer will only add to the trouble. What he didn't know was that shortly after he left, countless cracks opened on the humanoid stone carving. In an instant, the cracks slowly opened and closed, like countless eyes blinking and countless mouths singing, emitting a unique but never pleasant sound. Dang! The hour bell rang, and the sound spread from the top of the Ballatian-style building of the Sun Church to the surrounding area, enveloping the entire town of winds. The night is a carnival of monsters, but those monsters do not approach the church recklessly because of it. God has enough faith to protect the grandeur of his palace, but he disdains the entire town. He never opens his eyes to see the poor life, which leads to the emergence of heretics in the town. But this is also a good thing. Riya kept chasing the traces of those heretic monsters and found that as long as the other party saw the eyes on him, he would not launch an attack. Therefore, Riya could smoothly gather beliefs that God did not admire in this area under his eyes. He used the light of the red moon to desperately gather faith to cure himself, and those eyes disappeared one after another. In the end, only the one on his neck remained completely indelible. These eyes are quite special. When Riya cuts a wound on the skin, there is no blood flowing out, but instead cracked pupils. After receiving the power of faith, the wound heals and these eyes disappear. During this time, Riya also tried to cut open those eyes with a fruit knife. At that moment, he felt a heart-wrenching pain, with cracks appearing in his pupils, and more eyes sticking together like golden conch eggs, staring at him without blinking. Riya's hair stood on end in an instant, and she immediately found a way to heal her wound. She had no intention of causing any further damage to her pupils. No wonder they call him pollutant. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Red Moon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Red Moon. He didn't know if he would become a pile of eyeballs sticking together if he continued like this, but as time passed, his mood became increasingly heavy. Judging from Mrs. St's reaction when she saw him, she didn't know that Yuan Riya had left the room and had been dragged out and buried alive. That old woman values her true self very much. If she were to know about this, she might not know what to do. It's just that his original body clearly doesn't understand gratitude, and this can't be blamed on him. Anyone who gets infected with this disease after leaving their hometown will not easily trust others. He can only curl himself up in a dark room, curled up in a corner, like a pitiful maggot, gradually rotting and smelling. So who took him out of the room becomes the key. A person with severe autism will not easily go out, and he probably will only wait until he is too hungry to bear the food Mrs. Stewart gives before accepting it, and then allocate the bread reasonably for the following days. For example, breaking a piece in the morning to stuff your mouth, breaking a piece in the afternoon to stuff your mouth, and not eating it at night. Then the bread was eaten by a mouse when it was not paying attention. Why are you living such a miserable life, brother? Riya observed a 3-second silence for him, but later put himself in a different position and realized that his current situation was not much better. Sympathizing with others would not make him add a delicious and juicy steak to his dinner table, only adding to his psychological burden. Based on the current situation, he can only sneak out at night to search for sources of faith, which not only makes him feel better, but also makes him feel less hungry. If all of this were a dream, I would wake up lying in my bed at home, blowing the air conditioning and reading novels on my side, with my phone connected to a charger. Riya, who witnessed too many things beyond common sense in a day, began to daydream, but before he realized it, the size of the moon in the sky seemed to become larger and the color became redder. It had changed from the red spot when Riya was in the coffin to a complete crimson color, and when Riya looked up, he himself was startled. He had never seen such a large and bright moon before. The high saturation of red made Riya feel palpitations. But it is unknown whether they were led by the red moon, and the monsters hidden in the darkness also rebelled one after another. In their eyes, the only living creature in this town who dared to go out at night undoubtedly became a coveted treasure. They emerged from all directions, emitting deep, mechanical low growls in their throats. Judging from their appearance alone, it was impossible to describe their appearance. They were more like heretics who had dismembered dozens of different animals and then reattached them together. Watching them approach, Riya felt extremely nervous in his heart, but he deliberately came to the open place to search for these key creatures that could provide a lot of faith. They are no different from the humanoid monsters just now. It's worth taking such risks in order to survive. The big deal is death, and once you die, you wake up from sleep. Self-hypnotized to this point, Rhea tore the last bread into countless pieces and sprinkled them on them, then created several eyes in her palm to aim at them. After all, he was a businessman in his past life, and the clients he faced were sometimes much more terrifying than monsters. Although these monsters appeared terrifying, they could only roar around with their voices and could not speak at all. No matter how smart their brains were, they probably wouldn't be much smarter. And all of this is a dream. It's a dream. Rhea firmly believes in it, and he can only believe in this viewpoint. If this viewpoint is not established, he is afraid of doing something irrational. Friends, calm down and make a deal with me. I know you're very hungry and want to eat me, but before you eat me, why don't you have some appetizer bread to cushion your stomach? He was deadlocked with those monsters, and they clearly had no intention of ignoring the ground bread. For them, Rhea was more attractive. Rhea could only argue, I'm not tasty. If I eat it, I'll get an infectious disease, really. At the same time, he was frantically searching for a solution in his heart. Why was this transaction ineffective? Is it because he didn't have enough eyes on him? He quickly took off his coat and threw it on the ground. Just as Rhea was about to grit his teeth and take out the fruit knife again, a monster resembling a wolf or a pig suddenly circled behind him and pounced. Then, it saw the eerie pupils on the human neck. That eye stared at it like a ghost, and the monster suddenly stiffened, feeling its body slowly petrifying. However, at the same time, it looked at the crumbs on the ground and suddenly felt an extreme desire. Those things that had just been treated as garbage now turned into delicacies. The monster quickly rushed over and licked and nibbled on the bread, even if it was covered in dirt. Then, it completely petrified, with cracks appearing all over its body. Beneath those cracks were golden eyes, and the ground was covered in layers of debris. Rhea's suspicion was even more severe in his heart, but he soon knew what to do. He raised his hand and loudly declared to the monsters around him, as if an auctioneer was holding an auction. I use this sown beast to exchange faith with you. Bread may not meet the psychological needs of most monsters, so they refuse to exchange internally, and the one who just agreed is also the one who sees the back of their neck. All of this indicates that the eyes on the back of the neck are more special than ordinary eyes. Now, Rhea has found an exchange that better matches the monster's psychological expectations. After shouting that out, a magical scene appears. The monsters no longer paid attention to him, but rushed towards their petrified counterparts and quickly devoured them all. And finally, Rhea couldn't help but tremble all over with excitement. To be honest, these forces were too immense, and he no longer felt comfortable all over. Instead, his stomach was bloated, nauseous to the point of wanting to use his fingers to pinch his throat and extract his stomach. But Rhea still suppressed the urge to vomit and became excited. His guess was indeed not wrong, as those monsters showed a friendly expression towards him after devouring their own kind and no longer regarded him as an enemy. But this level of exchange is not enough to make them completely believe in Rhea and give up on him. Rhea touched the back of her neck, and the use of her eyes at the back was not to be underestimated, but it was quite difficult to use. After all, Rhea could not use the back to see things, nor could she walk in reverse. Once someone sneaks in from behind and closes their eyes, they might end up like this. Sigh. He watched as a small cat-like monster walked over, circling around him, as if asking if he had anything else to eat. Rhea remembered the humanoid monster before. Yes, I'll take you there. After speaking, he returned to his original path and found the guy again. As expected, his body was already filled with golden eyes. This mutation made Rhea twist her head slightly uncomfortable and look at the abnormal creatures behind her, whose mouths were flowing all over the ground. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Abnormal Tenants. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Abnormal Tenants, Let's Eat. Riya let out a sigh. As if pressing a switch, the group of monsters rushed forward, devouring all the new ones. At this moment, Riya couldn't help but find a trash can and vomit uncontrollably. Finally, his eyes turned red and he wiped his mouth hard. It seems that everything needs to have a degree. Originally, he wanted these monsters to be contaminated by the eyes on their necks one by one, and then divided among their own kind. However, it is obvious that this delusional greed achieved overnight is not in line with reality. It's so disgusting. Let's forget about today and continue tomorrow night. Riya bid farewell to the monsters affectionately, and thus decided to leave here and return to the so-called home to sleep. He put on the coat he was holding in his hand again and couldn't help but look up at the moon above his head. It was still surprisingly red. Although he is feeling uncomfortable all over now, his mood has surprisingly improved. If I have a calendar, I must write suitable for going out today. Today is really a good day. Riya hummed a tune and left, with an unknown tone mixed with an increasingly dense mist and crimson moon, appearing so eerie. The next morning, the first ray of sunlight shone through the spider web-covered glass, illuminating all the dust inside the wooden house. Riya opened her eyes and stretched lazily. Seeing that she was still in this room without crossing back, she couldn't help feeling a bit disappointed and inexplicable panic in her heart. He got up and put on his clothes, found the mirror and looked at it for a few times, only to find that his appearance was completely different from before. The young man in the mirror looks only 18 or 19 years old, with a deep face, pale skin color, and blue eyes, indicating typical malnutrition combined with a lack of sunlight. In addition, the young man also had dull black hair and a pair of light gray-blue eyes, which surprised him a bit. He thought his original eyes on his face should be golden, but surprisingly not. It seems that the golden eyes on the back of the neck and body are indeed due to pollution diseases, and outsiders are ultimately outsiders who cannot match the color of their original eyes. Although the back eyes are quite practical, they are also a curse, and I must find a way to get rid of them. Let's give it a try first. Thinking about it, Riya picked up a fruit knife and aimed it at the back of his neck to see if it could be removed. However, just as he was about to take action, his arms suddenly seemed to be tied up and unable to move. Riya gritted his teeth in an instant, knowing that the virus was preventing him. Since that was the case, it showed that the method was feasible. The worst outcome, both vertically and horizontally, was that a new group of eyes had fallen out. For him, there was no difference between one eye and a group of eyes. He insists on taking action, and the virus insists on preventing it. Just as the two were deadlocked, the door was knocked on, and Riya was busy struggling with her eyes without paying attention. Soon, the door lock was opened from outside. Mrs. Stewart slammed open the door and saw her tenant gritting their teeth with a knife ready to cut it off on their own. She angrily kicked the door to the side, and the loud noise frightened Riya, causing her fingers to become unstable. The fruit knife fell to the ground with a snap. "What are you doing? What do you think you are doing?" Riya looked at the old woman with grey hair in a daze, holding a bag of fresh bread in her arms and emitting heat, her whole body appearing particularly angry. "I can't stand you anymore. Do you know whose house this is? You have nothing to do in the house and cause trouble for me, right? If you want to die, get out of here and don't leave me with any excuses for the church to investigate." She finished speaking a bunch of words, and her anger had not completely dissipated. At this moment, Riya was not clear about what she had misunderstood, so she quickly explained ahead. "I just want to cut off the memory on my neck, it's not that I can't bear it." As he spoke, Mrs. Stewart suddenly took a few steps and circled behind him. Riya had intended to stop her, but it was already too late. He prayed to Mrs. Stewart not to cause any trouble when she saw her eyes. Unexpectedly, the other party was even more angry and said, "Juzi, okay, Juzi, there's no such thing as a Juzi. I see you look like a Juzi." She supported the wall, took a few deep breaths, and then stuffed the bread into Riya. You owe me 3 months and 5 days rent. I thought you were pitiful and didn't want to make things too difficult for you, but now it seems that you still need to be sent to a welfare home to work for a few months and calm down. Riya didn't hear what she said behind her. His mind was now filled with the fact that the other person couldn't see his own eyes behind him. Can't you really see it? That obvious thing, the obvious eyes behind me. Golden, glowing eyes. Mrs. Stewart looked at him, her gaze suddenly changed from anger to pity. Poor child. How could you become like this? You can't stay indoors anymore. You need to interact with society and work. Look at yourself, you already suffer from delusions. After speaking, she pulled Riya down the stairs, feeling a bit uncomfortable as she walked from the dark environment to the sunlight. But soon, he was attracted by the scenery here. Although it was only in the morning, people had already left their dreamy and gentle countryside to buy breakfast. Those people were dressed in a single outfit, and Winstown was already a remote town, so it was normal for people to dress in this way. Compared to others, Riya's own coat has become a luxury item among the clothes of this group. After Mrs. Stewart took Riya downstairs, she asked him to help her keep an eye on the shop downstairs and strictly demanded that he do it well, otherwise she wouldn't want to leave here. She taught Riya how to stuff the bread germ into the oven and how to take it out and set it on a plate for people to choose from without being too hot. Of course, these are the basics. She couldn't teach Riya how to make bread, in case this tenant with an abnormal brain suddenly suffocates the batter mixed with water on his face, it would be troublesome. No, he can't get close to the oven. Mrs. Stewart remembered that the oven also had a certain level of danger, but when she turned her head to look, Riya had already reached half of her body into the oven. Although there wasn't much heat inside now, and Riya was just curious about the structure of the oven in this world, Mrs. St still pulled his collar down for him. At this moment, her face is definitely not good looking. You go see the store, I'll teach you how to sell things. She walked up to the stall, and it was rare for her tenant to be willing to come down and see the store. She had to explain more to him. Remember, the price of a loaf of bread is 2 shavars, 3 shavars with cream and leaves, and 5 shavars with sausages. Buying more won't be discounted. Riya was puzzled and said, "What is svar?" He has never even heard of the currency units in this world. Mrs. Stewart initially thought that Riya had a problem with her brain, but now she has confirmed her own idea. Her gaze softened as she patiently explained with a kind smile, that's the most basic currency. 100 shavars can be exchanged for 1 liter, 100 liter is a silver coin, and 100 silver coins is a gold coin. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Black Bread. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Black Bread, but Gold Coins. I've only had the privilege of seeing them a few times in my life when it comes to real estate transactions. So it's like this. Riya secretly remembered and looked at the goods placed on the table in front of her. These breads were all made of rye and had a hard and sour taste, which was not delicious at all. As for white bread, Riya guessed that it should be a food that can only be enjoyed by the upper class. For now, he shouldn't think too much about it. He is already quite lucky to have something to eat. Mrs. Stewart's bakery does indeed have vegetable leaves, cream, butter, and sausages, and Riya can only guarantee that the vegetable leaves are absolutely vegetable leaves. As for what cream, butter, and sausages are made separately, he cannot say. Not long ago, he had already observed the oven, which was just a stone stove burning wood, with no signs of mechanization. Now, Mrs. St has just thrown in the new wood, and the smell of it being ignited is a bit pungent. But in fact, after staying for a long time, it smells okay, which is probably due to the terrifying habit. In such an environment, plates of fresh hot bread are being baked one after another, and Riya's job is to sell them, which is not difficult. Bread is completely in short supply in such places, and even before the plates are placed, there is already a large queue of people in front of the door. Riya was worried that the person who buried him would recognize him, so she asked Mrs. St for a mask. In the end, she only gave Riya a piece of burlap to cover half of his face, to prevent him from being unable to bear the smoke smell. Actually, what Riya can't stand is the people who want to harm her. I'm worried that these won't work either. Maybe the person who was responsible for burying me back then was already isolated as a close contact patient. He speculated maliciously and then packaged the bread and handed it to the customer, but the truth still had to be known to himself. Normal contact will not cause infection, only by seeing the eyes behind his neck. The two monsters from last night are the best proof. As long as they grow eyes all over their bodies, Riya can determine that they have been successfully infected. And Mrs. St said she didn't see anything, so she shouldn't be a specific target. Perhaps ordinary people cannot see their true appearance. Only those monsters are the target objects of infection. Riya continued to hand out the black face bag, constantly making theoretical inferences in his heart. He would rather doubt others than himself. This may be a bad habit, but to some extent, it can save his life. With this in mind, he began to ponder whether those eyes could automatically appear on his body. If he had to scratch himself every time, it would be too uneconomical. He needed the kind of eyes that could open and close freely as he pleased. I don't know if I heard his voice, but Riya's fingers moved and a small gap appeared above. It was the area that had been injured and healed before, and now it has reappeared in the eyes. Does this not mean that his injury has never healed at all? What kind of deadly disease is this? Riya was quite depressed, and her eyes on her fingers blinked a few times as she stared at him, feeling inexplicably lively after a long time. Damn your liveliness. He quickly kicked this strange idea out of his mind, his hands trembling, and at the same time, Riya could hear the rapid beating of his heart. Dong! Dong dong! It gave Riya a drumbeat-like inspiration that he must not stare at those eyes for a long time. Maybe if he looks for too long, he will be affected by them and won't be able to do anything to harm them again. However, since Riya doesn't want these eyes to affect her, she can go and influence others. It's also a good idea for him to leave here and find a safe place to live or seclude in the mountains and forests when he collects enough faith or money. Sir, I need 10 freshly baked black bread. Can you pack me 5 paper bags? Okay, there are a total of 20 swars. With one hand paying and the other delivering, Riya's eyes moved on her fingers and she looked at the freckled girl who was buying bread. The girl felt momentarily confused. She always felt as if she had seen an eye on the hand of the person in front of her just now, but when she looked again, it was gone. When she thought again, she couldn't recall what she had just seen. Where do normal people have eyes on their hands? She took the bread, paid Sval, and Riya took the heavy money made of unknown metal, assuming that this transaction was successful. So the girl instantly forgot about the so-called strange things she had seen before, and her liking for this bakery increased significantly. May the sun bless me. As long as you are still here, sir, I come to buy bread every day. After speaking, she walked away holding the bread, while Riya silently recorded in her heart that as long as I gave the item, faith could be accepted regardless of whether the other party had given a normal return. This is a quite interesting discovery. Moreover, this is the first belief from humans, much stronger than cockroaches and mice, although weaker than those monsters, it doesn't matter at all. People are much easier to find than monsters. In the following time, bags of freshly baked black bread were sold by Riya, who promptly cut losses and closed his eyes on his fingers. Belief that eating too much will hold up, and it wasn't long before he felt nauseous and nauseous. His eyes and the back of his neck also felt a burning sensation, and he didn't know what would happen if he continued to eat. At this point it was already time to sell breakfast, and Mrs. St asked Riya to help her tidy up the plates, while also distributing half of the remaining bread to him and the other half to other tenants. As soon as Riya heard of the opportunity to interact with another tenant, she recommended herself to Mrs. St. Can I go deliver it? This is still your first time being so proactive, Kercha. Mrs. St looked at him with great relief. Sure enough, staying indoors all day can lead to mental illness. Just now, let's take a look. Kelcha, who was once gloomy, has become much more cheerful. So she handed over all the bread to Riya and instructed him to get along well with another tenant. Riya quickly nodded, saying that it was definitely right to leave it all to herself. By the way, I don't know what the tenant should be called yet. Why did you forget her name again? Her name is Angna. Be polite when you see that child and come out as soon as you finish delivering. Okay. Riya nodded while holding the bread paper bag. Angela, by name, she should be a woman and not that difficult to get along with. He thought so, but as soon as he reached the third floor and knocked on the door, it opened on its own. The so-dot called Miss Angela looked at him with a fluffy and completely neglected head, and through the crack in the door, Riya noticed that the room was filled with books, but it was unusually dim inside. Are you the tenant downstairs from me? That's right. Riya didn't deny it. Maybe they had seen each other before when they first moved in, so there's no need to pretend not to know each other. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The Secret Keeper. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The Secret Keeper. Oh. Angna exposed her teeth while speaking, with uneven teeth, but she had no intention of wearing braces at all. It's better to say that she couldn't afford those braces at all. Quickly, the girl took the black bread and sniffed it under her nose. As Riya did not use golden eyes, she naturally did not gain any faith. You are a good person, Mr. Kercha. May the sun protect you. After finishing speaking, Angna drew a pattern resembling a mosquito coil in her heart. However, she did not close the door and left. Instead, she fixed her gaze on Riya with green crystal-like eyes. Just as he couldn't help but speak, Angna took the first step out of her pocket and handed him 10 swars. Riya was somewhat surprised and didn't move. Angna's eyes were filled with eagerness as she said, "Can you help me buy a dictionary from the bookstore and bring it back? I bought it for my younger brother, and I want to teach him how to recognize words. The rest of swar can be used as running errands for you." Upon hearing that he had money to buy, Riya's eyes lit up a bit. He enthusiastically asked Angela if there was anything else she needed to help buy. The child racked his brains for a while and then said that his younger brother still needed a medical encyclopedia. She gave Riya 10 more swars, and Riya put the money in a cloth package. After going downstairs to ask for the location of Mrs. Stewart's bookstore, she went out wearing a mask. He was not the only one dressed like this on the street, so this kind of attire would not arouse suspicion from others. After passing through a group of brick and tile buildings, Riya arrived at a small alley. The gray walls on both sides block out all the sunlight, and the gray-green moss that doesn't like light climbs up the stairs there. Although the weather was normal, Riya felt the cold for no reason. He moved his throat and walked into the darkness expressionlessly. Soon, he found the bookstore, and the owner happily welcomed him. "Welcome to my dilapidated bookstore, all books here are not for loan." The boss's voice was a bit hoarse, and he had a relatively obese physique. The 2 layers of excess flesh combined to make one metal button on the shirt wobble. But what Riya cares about is not these, but the bird's beak mask on this person's face. "Are you a doctor?" Riya's eyes, which were covered by her collar, turned around, clearly feeling uncomfortable with the word doctor. In some early places, doctors would wear masks resembling birds to prevent the spread of diseases, with fragrant petals placed inside. They hoped to use the fragrance of flowers to resist the invasion of the plague. No, no, no. Seemingly sensing Riya's discomfort, the boss shook his head and said, "How could I have come into contact with such a great profession? I am just a backward guardian. I heard through the grapevine that there have been pollution patients appearing in this town recently, so I have taken measures on my face. You see, you're also wearing a mask, we're all afraid of that kind of thing, aren't you?" Speaking, the bookstore owner approached Riya. I smell the aura of the mysterious side on you. If one day you really have the mysterious side ability, maybe we can become colleagues. Riya did not answer this paragraph, but went into the bookstore and picked up books on her own. He has been living a more chaotic life these days than before, and now he won't be surprised to see anything. After a moment, he took out a book. Where did that pollution patient hide? Hi, they got dealt with by the church. They're really quick to take action. It's clear that these things have always been the job of our secret guards. What does he look like? How do I know? Upon hearing the other person say that he didn't know what the patient looked like, Riya breathed a sigh of relief. He had already found the 2 books he wanted during the conversation. The price of the dictionary is 7 svals, while the price of the Encyclopedia of Medicine is 8 svals. Based on this calculation, Riya still has 5 svals of running expenses to cover. Just take these 2 books, let's settle the bill. Do you need to pack it? The packing fee is 2 sval. 2 svar. Snatching money. Upon hearing that just the packing fee required 2 shavars, Riya almost couldn't contain the commotion in his eyes. He quickly said no, but when he was giving the money, his finger cracked and a small eye was hidden between his nails, which he couldn't detect without careful examination. And this eye will also witness the completion of this transaction. Even if the other party gives the item and pays for it himself, he will still gather some faith from the other party. This is what is called diligence, frugality, and frugality. If you can make money, then make it. Moreover, it is unknown whether the beliefs of the guardian may differ from those of others. Wow! As Riya's several swars entered the hands of the bookstore owner, the transaction was declared completed. He bid farewell to the shop owner in a good mood and said that he would come back if there was a chance in the future, but the owner did not stop him from leaving. Not long after Riya left, the boss picked up sval in his hand and sighed as he listened to the sound of metal colliding with each other. We will meet again soon. He spoke and directly lifted the lenses on the bird's beak mask, pouring sval in and shaking it. The bookstore quickly echoed with the sharp sound of metal being bit by teeth. That decibel is enough to cause a normal person's eardrums to rupture and intracranial hemorrhage, but the boss crushes them like chewing some ordinary food and then swallows them into the narrow and fragile esophagus. More than 10 minutes later, Riya returned to his residence with a book. He ran to the 3rd floor and knocked on Angela's door. The child slowly opened the door and was pleasantly surprised when he received the book he wanted. She held on to the dictionary and encyclopedia, carefully rubbing their hard surfaces with her fingers as if she had seen some rare treasure. Thank you, Mr. Kercha. You really like books. I don't like it at all, it's my younger brother who likes books. She insisted on the idea that all the books were bought for her younger brother, but in Riya's impression, she had never seen Agnes so called younger brother. Never mind, maybe her younger brother lives elsewhere. Riya stopped meddling in these things she shouldn't have, went downstairs and tidied up in her own room, while also planning to feed the little mouse something to eat. Just when he saw it again, it died. The grey mouse, covered in dirt and bony bones, fell to the ground with its eyes open, limbs stiff, except for its swollen belly, which swelled like a water balloon that would burst with a single thrust. And all the breadcrumbs that Riya had put on it before disappeared. It was obvious that it had not eaten anything for too long and couldn't adapt to eating so much at once. A mouse that had not seen food for too long suddenly had food and would rather hold itself to death than continue eating every few hours. Because it doesn't know when it will start starving again. I don't know why, but Riya thinks this mouse is very sad. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Bates. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Bates. He temporarily ignored the corpses of the mice and cleaned up the house, making it look like a place that a person should have. On the way of cleaning up, Riya found a lot of garbage from under the bed, which was mixed with mouse corpses with a sour and decaying smell, pupae molted by maggots, dead flies, and moldy bread fragments, all of which were disgusting and suffocating. He covered his nose and gathered these garbage together, intending to throw them out in the middle of the night to feed those monsters. As for the dead mouse he had fed, Rhea chose to bury it in the soil. After all, it was also his first follower. Eating or throwing the mouse to feed the monster like this always made him feel guilty. And now that he has a source of food, there's no need to eat malnourished mouse meat again. The night seems to come exceptionally fast. Night. The red moon still hung high in the sky, silently gazing at the figures of every nocturnal creature, including Rhea squatting in the alley digging soil. Rhea personally dug a 1-foot-deep grave for the first believer, burying its body, which can be considered as burying the unfortunate youth of its original body from beginning to end. If you can live again, don't be fooled into digging any coal again. Having a safe life is considered fortunate. I originally wanted to make money to buy you cakes and sweet cheese that you had never eaten before, and fulfill my promise. He remained silent for a long time in front of the mound, and the surrounding buildings and dark night were like a cage that bound them. Bang! Rhea suddenly stepped out and flattened the mound of soil, so that no signs of being dug were visible. And behind him, there were already monsters who were eyeing him after smelling the scent of living people. These monsters have a variety of strange appearances, some resembling sutures between humans and animals, while others resemble sutures between animals and plants, appearing unappealing. From where they are sutured, they sometimes drip sticky liquids like gutter oil. As soon as these liquids fell to the ground, they immediately corroded the land and made a sizzling sound. The strong stench instantly filled Rhea's nose, and he covered it in disgust. Compared to yesterday, the color of today's moon has faded a lot, but it still maintains a perfect shape occupying a quarter of the sky. Those monsters were not as fierce as yesterday, and when facing Rhea, their eyes even showed a hint of longing and anticipation. Riot uncurved his eyes and said, "Good kids, look what delicious food I brought you today." After speaking, he shook the garbage bag and threw the garbage he had collected into the monster group. The group of shapeless beasts instantly boiled like live fish in an oil pot. They fought fiercely for a garbage bag, biting each other, competing and plundering. And not far from them, Rhea watched all of this with great interest, his body cracked with countless eyes, these eyes coldly staring at those creatures. They occasionally blinked to prove their activity. Broken bones, flesh, and stitched threads flew horizontally, and Rhea saw the black unknown material thread falling at her feet and reached out to pick it up. It feels a bit like wire, but it's softer than wire. Just as he was pondering what this thing was, the wire suddenly twisted its body, and this activity made Rhea suddenly enlightened. Iron wire worm. The length of that wire worm reached 10 meters or more, and the scene of so many wire worms falling to the ground together is really impressive. Looking from a high place, it's like a woman with long hair combing her hair and falling all over the ground. Gulu, gulu, as soon as the wire worms landed, they searched for the flesh and blood wreckage that had fallen at the same time, stretching their heads in an attempt to crawl back in and twist their bodies to sew them together. But with Rhea present, all of this is in vain. Rhea grabbed them hand by hand, constantly collecting the wire worms on the ground, and then tied their bodies together. Soon, these guys who were not good at attacking but only knew how to drill randomly were bound into a large ball of wire. During this period, several wire worms entangled his wrists, trying to penetrate his flesh. Fortunately, Rhea discovered it in time and bit it off, mixing it with the soil above and spitting it out. Pooh! These guys' vitality is not as stubborn as earthworms, but it's just a cut off and they just don't move anymore. He has already tied the iron wire ball and clapped his hands with a sense of achievement, feeling happy as he watched them struggle out and constantly twist their bodies. Rhea is very good at tying knots. When he was a child in his past life, he often tied his shoelaces in a way that no one could untie because he couldn't tie them. In other words, these wire worms cannot escape from the knot in just a few hours. And those remaining monsters also seized their favorite garbage. For them, the life of their kind is far less important than a bag of garbage. Riya watched them finish their garbage and counted the number of remaining monsters, feeling that she didn't need to continue raising them. Monsters should be more refined and abundant. If these guys can devour each other like raising goo, and only the most powerful one is left in the end, it will save a lot of trouble. But in case I can't influence that guy, wouldn't it be a loss to get myself involved? We need to find a win-win solution. Riya's gaze kept sweeping over the iron wire and the monsters, trying to ignore the stench and sticky lumps that came from him. He walked to the front of the iron wire and turned his back to them, pulling down his collar to reveal his neck. The wire worms instantly became stiff, feeling that the humans in front of them were completely unguarded, with delicious meat and fat right in front of them. With just a slight movement, they can burrow into human necks, reside in their blood vessels, and transform their flesh into dens more suitable for insect habitation. But they cannot do it. There were eyes around the person's neck, which caused great panic among the wire worms who couldn't see anything. It's a pathogen. We'll die. We'll die. We'll die. The wire worms struggled to wriggle their slender bodies in an attempt to escape, but their bodies were already fixed. Even if they tried to wriggle hard, all they could hear was the rusty collision between their bodies. Sting. Iron wire worms have eyes. But the bad news is that each of their bodies is covered in dense eyes, which parasitize their bodies and absorb their own nutrients. Quickly, this group of wire worms lost their movement. And Riya breathed a sigh of relief. He made a bet and now he has won. Roar. A few monsters walked towards the wire worms, and Riya made way for them, telling them that only the strongest among them was qualified to eat this delicious food. The shimmering golden wire ball was indeed full of temptation for the monsters, and their unintelligent brains quickly rushed towards their own kind with a slight twist. So the tragedy that happened not long ago happened again, and these monsters refused to let anyone get entangled again. Blood and mucus wriggled together, making it difficult to separate. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Under the Red Moon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Under the Red Moon. After an unknown amount of time, Riya leaned against the wall, feeling drowsy. In a daze, he heard the customer slapping the table and insulting him. The other party's emotions were agitated, their wording was unbearable, and their voice was hoarse and noisy like a broken gong, making Riya angry from the bottom of her heart. But when he opened his eyes and was ready to curse back, there were no so-called customers in front of him, only a huge creature with strange shapes. That creature is 5 stories tall, pitch black all over, covered in sharp feathers that reflect a metallic luster under the illumination of the red moon. It is somewhat like a bird, with 2 pairs of wings growing behind it, 1 pair long and 1 pair short. Its 4 feathers-covered claws tightly grasp the ground, and behind it, a lizard-like tail sweeps back and forth, occasionally making the sound of scales rubbing against Riya's ears. It's hard to describe the true appearance of the creature in front of her. After looking at it for a while, Riya couldn't figure out whether it was a dragon or a bird, or a lion or a cat. It looked like a legendary griffin, but it didn't have the graceful and slender body of a griffin. If seeing a real griffin would excite Riya, then Riya admits that the creature in front of him experienced extreme fear for the first time. He thinks his psychological resilience is quite good, but when faced with that monster, the word death still fills his brain. Ah. This creature extended its claws towards Riya, who quickly dodged to the side as she watched the claw with nails longer than her own. The scheduled pain and limb crushing did not occur. The creature didn't take Riya as its target. It picked up a ball of wire on the ground with 1 claw, stuffed it into its mouth, and swallowed it before turning its gaze to Riya. Riya received the power of faith from it, but the behemoth seemed to have no intention of bowing to him. And while he was observing it, it was also observing Riya. It couldn't help but wonder when it saw the humans on the ground suddenly covering their mouths with a look of wanting to vomit. The new intelligence made it determine that Riya was sick and it should treat him. That person is very important to it. Although the creature doesn't understand why it thinks this way, it still directly identifies Riya as its own parents. It is appropriate for children to take care of their parents who are sick. The more I thought about it, the more reasonable it became. This huge creature let out a joyful roar, revealing its hooked teeth in its mouth. The sound did not dissipate, and its figure frantically shrank. Its originally scaly feathers turned into petroleum-like liquid and contracted, and its bones quickly melted. Quickly, it transformed into a feathered ball-shaped object. Riya witnessed all of this with her own eyes, and her intuition was that she should be as far away as possible from that feather. But who knew that the next second it suddenly pounced on her like a mad dog, and she didn't have time to dodge before she pounced on her face. The strange creature's feathers trembled, and suddenly, it drilled out a large number of tentacles from the gaps in its feathers to fix Riya's upper and lower jaws. It then reached into his mouth and went straight down his throat. Riya reached out and tugged hard at it, her eyes bursting with an unprecedented golden light, but this struggle was of no use. Instead, the monster was scraping harder and harder, causing its bones to almost shatter. Quickly, the entire creature turned into an unidentified substance and completely penetrated into Riya's stomach. Riya groped her abdomen with a gloomy face, pondering the feasibility of performing surgery to remove the monster. The nausea caused by the saturation of faith has completely disappeared now, but Riya doesn't feel fortunate. He thinks he is still too careless and should be more cautious in his actions. He shouldn't just trap himself in this way. A gust of wind blew by, leaving his stomach motionless. But Riya was restless and restless inside. He leaned against the wall with one hand, his fingers constantly digging in his mouth, and his other hand was pinching his throat, trying to use this method to spit out the monster. However, he failed. There was nothing on the ground except for a puddle of green stomach acid. The monster seemed to have never appeared, and the color of the moon in the sky quickly faded until it disappeared. Losing all the monsters, Winstown appeared harmonious and peaceful under the white moonlight. People lay at home, pretending not to hear any unusual movements, and could sleep soundly every day. Except for Riya. He couldn't calm down at all, and after using all means to separate the pile of feathers, he took out a fruit knife and studied for a while. The blade is sharp, and Riya can even see the unnatural expression on her face and the bright white moon in the sky through it. Forget it, there isn't much more of it anyway. A few minutes later, he seemed to have figured something out and put down the fruit knife. The benefits of black feather entering the abdomen are not without it. It is difficult for him to encounter nausea and vomiting when collecting the power of faith now, and this feather entering the abdomen also provides him with a lot of faith. Perhaps the monster had no ill intentions towards him. It wholeheartedly regarded Riya as its own deity, but Riya, the deity, was full of thoughts on how to kill it. It's just a dream. With a murmur, Riya continued to remind herself and turned back to her residence to sleep. The next day. The early morning sunshine spread throughout the town of Wentz, which was not warm. On the contrary, its appearance reminded everyone. It was time to get up and work. Riya continued to help Mrs. St sell bread as usual, and Mrs. St said that as long as Riya performed well, she would pay him 3 lays salary by the end of the month. After knowing that he had a salary, Riya's movements became faster in the field. And Mrs. St gradually opened up her heart to this young man. Since Riya left the closed cabin and went downstairs to help her work, his whole complexion has improved, and the former shadow has disappeared. Business seems to have improved a lot recently, with many people guarding the bakery door before it opened, openly wanting to see Riyakercha. After Riya appeared, they all cheered and exclaimed that the bread sold by Riya was the best in the world. This made Riya feel somewhat helpless and deeply aware of the horror of the celebrity effect. "Sir. I want 50 black bread to pack and take away. I want 100. I want everything." The people in front of him looked at him with enthusiasm in their eyes. As soon as Riya took out a basket of bread, it was snatched away by someone. I'm glad everyone likes our store's products, but please make purchases within your affordability. The people in this town are generally not wealthy, as Riya knows. The most magnificent building in the entire town of Wentz is nothing more than the Sun Church on the edge, which insists on wasting its financial and human resources on the Emperor of Fuli Church, saying that this is the greatest respect for the sun. Only in this way can the sun bless everyone for a long time. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Black Feather. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Black Feather. Do they actually believe in the sun god or the sun sphere itself? Do people here have the concept of stars? Riya silently handed the paper bag filled with black bread to the customer, and at his suggestion, the sale of black bread became limited edition. He is more focused on benefits, but he doesn't want those poor people to use their entire wealth or even loans to buy bread. Evil capitalists are often hung with streetlights in certain times. Mrs. Stewart pursed her lips and stubbornly believed that the reason bread became so popular was due to Riya's outstanding appearance. In such a poor and impoverished place, there are already fewer people who are upright in appearance, and even fewer young people of appropriate age are upright. Riya, who had regained his complexion, looked green with a hint of bookishness. Even though he usually wore a mask with only one pair of eyes exposed, his light gray-blue pupils were enough to attract people from the town to come after him. Mrs. St sees him as a junior and it is normal to worry about his future happiness. But she secretly observed for a while and found that Riya's wooden head didn't say anything extra to anyone except for being polite in trading. After setting up a stall for an hour, he managed to maintain a polite smile for an hour. Polite and easygoing with a hint of alienation. And those customers also orderly received the black bread in his hand for payment, all in an orderly manner, but Mrs. St felt that this scene was somewhat mechanical, as if there was something strange but everything was as usual. It must be that she hasn't been resting well lately and has been overthinking. Recently, there has been an inexplicable increase in monsters outside, which almost makes people unable to sleep. If it weren't for the church's regulations that residents cannot go out at night, Stuart would have wanted to grab a broom and go out, hitting those monsters that even his grandmother doesn't know. Mrs. Stewart. A voice timidly emanated from the staircase. Stuart turned his head and found that Angela had run down from the third floor, and her target this time was Riya. The phrase, Mrs. Stewart, was just a simple greeting. She ran happily behind Riya, although her appearance was a bit ordinary and her teeth were not straight, her personality completely made up for this deficiency, making people ignore those simple and ordinary things. As Angela smiled, she couldn't help but think of the young deer in the forest, with sunlight shining on her brown curly hair, coating it with a thin layer of gold. Brother Kelcha, my younger brother really likes those books. He asked me to tell you, and he is very grateful to you. Riya also curved the corner of his mouth and reached out to touch the little girl's head, pressing her unruly hair back. Just like it, reading more is always useful. The child nodded happily, speaking much more than yesterday. Then, she began to tell Riya her purpose, taking out a cloth bag from the pocket of her linen skirt and displaying 50 swore coins to Riya. My younger brother still needs books, the more books, the better. What books do you want me to buy this time? Not those, only one book. A book worth around 50 shavars. Riya was a little wary, while Angna lowered her voice as if afraid of being heard. This is one of my younger brother's few savings. In order to save this book, he hasn't eaten good food or bought new clothes for a long time. As she spoke, she became somewhat depressed, but Riya did not expose her. He has already asked, and there is only Angna living on the third floor, so the so-called younger brother does not exist. What book does your younger brother need? The Mysterious Item Illustrated Guide. Riya was new to this book and was not quite sure what was special about it, but he could still detect some anomalies from its name. There are really strange creatures and bizarre scenes in this world. If a book dares to set its title like this, its content is likely to exist in reality. It seems necessary to take a look. But the bookstore owner always feels like there's something strange. I feel like beating him up a bit. Riya was inexplicably unhappy with the shop owner, but she still picked up the floor cleaning cloth and found a clean edge to wipe her shoes. She sorted her clothes and went out again. The alley is still that alley. The boss is still the same boss. When Riya saw him again, the chubby man wearing a bird beak mask was cleaning the dust on the bookshelf with a feather duster. Goodbye Riya, he was not surprised at all, as if he had already guessed that he would come again. Welcome, guest. What can I buy? Here, except for me and the feather pens on my desk, we don't sell them. You can freely choose anything else. Riya fixed her gaze on the feather pen on the black wooden table, which was also pitch black. Just looking at it gave her goosebumps. That color is different from normal colors, as if it contains thousands of incomprehensible colors, condensed together into a dark and dark darkness. Riya immediately shifted his gaze. He was now very resistant to substances like feathers, and just thinking about it automatically brought to mind the feathered creature that had crawled into his throat last night. That thing made him feel nauseous and unable to spit it out. He wanted to have it cut open, but was afraid that there would be nothing left. It was a waste of effort. It is indeed a hassle. Besides, Riya had a thought process in her heart and was about to ask about feathers when she suddenly turned around to find the bookstore owner standing behind her at some point. His leather mask had a strong odor, and I don't know what animal had not been treated properly. The smell of fat mixed with sweat made Riya take a step back, feeling a physical discomfort from the bottom of his heart. Hey! The boss laughed twice and then patted Riya's clothes with a feather duster. It's time to take a shower, there's a lot of dust on your body. I just washed it yesterday, and I'm afraid your lenses were made under a microscope. Riya asked the other party what book he wanted to buy, but the boss didn't say much. He clumsily lifted a ladder and handed it to him from the 9th shelf. Why are you still looking at my feather pen? Do you really want it? The boss spoke slightly displeased. I found it and can't give it to you. I just feel that feather looks familiar to me. Familiar eyes. That's right. I picked it up after you last night. Riya. In just one sentence, the atmosphere condensed to freezing point. The young man wearing a large brown coat had increasingly blurred eyes, and his skin surface began to show obvious peristalsis. It can be seen that Riya is trying her best to restrain herself from revealing her inappropriate eyes. He spoke slowly and his voice was hoarse. I'm not sure what you're talking about. If there's nothing else, I'll leave first. Since the other party revealed what happened last night, whether it was a probe or not, Riya must leave now. He dare not gamble whether the other party wants to kill him. Although from the current situation, the other party has no malicious intent. Riya paid the money and didn't even bother to accept his faith, so he turned his head and ran away. However, the next second, he saw the bookstore owner blocking in front of him, pointing his fingers at the feather pen made of black feathers at his neck. End of this chapter.